Around that time, my spirit failed. I was really asking too much of myself as a creative person. It wasn't that I ran out of money. It wasn't that it wasn't that somebody broke a window, which also happened. It wasn't that.
Oh,
It was my spirit failed, is what it was, and I had to just get back up on that, and I was back up on it. But that was a really hard moment where I remember like laying down in the back of the ambulance, being like, "This isn't gonna work. Like this is a stupid idea. Give up. Walk away." And I talked myself out of it. So that was a failure to me. Is I let that attitude sink in for too long.
you're listening to the Creative Impostor, episode number 93. Welcome to the Creative Impostor. I'm Andrea Klunder, and it has taken me a while to post this and to respond to what is happening in our world right now. And that is for a few reasons. I felt blindsided over the past couple weeks and have had to react and find ways to be proactive in my business to support clients and colleagues and cash flow. I have had to focus in on making sure that friends, family, and myself are all okay and have what we need when we don't even really know what we need. And I'm sure that your story has been similar. But more importantly, I delayed posting this because I want to choose my words carefully. I want to show up as a leader right now. And in fact, I think it's important for podcasters and all content creators who have a platform to really think about using it right now to amplify good in the face of a lot of BS that is getting amplified in other not so helpful ways. And so I felt both pressured and paralyzed because I know that whatever I say now will be heard years from now when everything might be totally different. I mean, heck, everything feels different moment to moment, day by day. There is an onslaught of media and some very good podcast episodes already out there covering coronavirus and COVID-19. Does anyone else feel like we shouldn't say it out loud, like he who shall not be named or something? Anyway, there are a lot of good podcast episodes out there covering this pandemic from all different angles that I will link to in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimpostor.com/093 for episode 93. And maybe you're gobbling it all up, and maybe you're sick of it. Anything that's not about that topic may be a total relief for your ears, and also may sound completely tone deaf. I did some meditating today in quiet. No podcasts in my ears, no Facebook in my face, no conversations on my phone, no client work under my fingertips, and checked in with my gut to see what I wanted to say to you. What could I offer? And here's what I came up with. I'm going to stick with my original intent with the Creative Impostor, which is to follow my curiosity. And right now, what I'm most curious about is how entrepreneurs, small business owners, creators, and artists are finding clever strategies for quick pivots to mitigate lost income, cancellations, and disappointment, and to really show up and support their community, their followers, and each other. I'm honestly inspired by some of the ingenuity, hope, humor, and love I'm seeing on social media, and so that gave me an idea. I'm going to spend the next few weeks sharing those stories and insights with you as they're unfolding. I have some incredible people lined up to speak to later this week, and I think that you're going to find what we talk about to be super useful. In the meantime, today I have an interview that I recorded nearly a year ago. I know. It's been a rough year, y'all. I don't know why I sat on this episode for so long, except to say that I was intuitively waiting for the right moment, the right context. And that moment, that context, is now. Lucas Spivey is one of the most interesting characters I've met in the last year, maybe ever. His brand, Culture Hustlers, is all about helping artists learn how to make a living through business training, collaboration, and innovation. His quote-unquote classroom is a mobile incubator. And by that, I mean a vintage Canadian ambulance and retrofitted trailer that he has driven to, by this point, all 50 states. Yep, even Hawaii, collecting and recording the stories of thousands of artists, performers, writers, designers, makers, and other entrepreneurs, and publishing them through podcasts, video, and social media. And our technical director at the Creative Impostor Studios, Edwin Ruiz, got to direct and produce a docu-short on their recent stop in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's called Don't Hate, Collaborate, and we will, of course, link it in the show notes for this episode, which you can find, once again, at thecreativeimpostor.com/093. And we will also be linking to the Culture Hustlers podcast, which you will be hearing more about in a moment. This conversation, however, that you are about to hear, it's coming, I promise it's coming, is unlike any other that we have had on this show, because Lucas and I had just met for the first time, and we recorded together in person inside the vintage ambulance with his, at that time, brand new podcasting setup. Think fancy mics strapped over your shoulder. Well, we'll get into that in a second. Oh, and yep, Lucas even takes the ambulance for a spin around my neighborhood in Chicago while we were recording. Is that legal? Oh, and the whole time, Edwin and two of Lucas's collaborators were in the back running sound and hanging out. So easily the most bizarre podcasting experience I have had to date. Now, the reason I wanted to share this episode right now is, well, a couple things. First of all, there is so much freedom, fun, and flexibility in this session. I felt like it was something that I know made me feel a lot better and more optimistic when I listened back. Some relief for you in the midst of a lot of tense and overly urgent media. Lucas's advice speaks right to the heart of what it means to be a creative, no matter what else is going on in the world. We talk a lot specifically about podcasting, but I think most of what we discuss could really apply to any creative medium of expression. So just replace podcasting with whatever it is you're dreaming of creating right now. And also, Lucas's next Culture Hustlers cohort starts in May 2020, and he's offering the first month free to select applicants. Okay, what on earth is a Culture Hustlers cohort? Basically, it is a 12-month long deep dive into creating a business plan for your art that will get you paid. And not only do you get Lucas, but you get a whole group of dynamic, interesting, talented people who are all hustling culture just like you. The application deadline for the next cohort is coming up fast, April 6th. So don't hesitate to go check it out ASAP and see if his totally online program might be right to help you kick your creative business off or up a notch, depending on what it is you need right now. The link, of course, will be in the show notes. And now, finally, at last, Lucas Spivey from Culture Hustlers.
Okay, sweet. All right, how are the levels now?
The inaugural mic check.
I'm here. All right. I mean, once I fire up the ambulance, there's going to be that nice background noise. How's the street noise right now?
Yeah, so here we are on Western Avenue in Bucktown. Some people would call this Logan, some people would call it Bucktown, some people would call it Wicker Park. It kind of depends on which neighborhood you feel like is the coolest at the moment. But we're right here by Armitage in Milwaukee, sitting outside of Ipsento Coffee Shop. And this is my hood. We're about like a 5 to 8 minute walk away from where I live. And
good choice for a meetup, Lucas.
Nice. Very easy to get to where we're going. Okay, what is this vehicle exactly?
This is a 1973 Canadian ambulance. I'm pretty sure it served in the military up in Canada because it was originally painted mint green. But I found this thing in Massachusetts about 1.5 years ago, and I gave it a pretty slick paint job, in my humble opinion. A champagne color with solar panels on the roof, and the inside I built out as like a towing vehicle, but also like I guess I dreamed of it being more than that. So I put a bed in here in case I got a crash, and that bed is honestly far more comfortable than most places. And then up front we have a lot of room. So it's like a 7 by 7 foot square of like nothing. And my dream was that one day that would be kind of like someone could be recording on the road and like even like editing video and podcasts like back there, just like a workstation. So today is the first day that's happening. I guess it sort of happened a while ago, but like not with like 5 people here. This feels like a whole film studio inside here today. So
Totally. So we've got 2 mics on boom arms strapped over, kind of like over the shoulder from the back into the front seats. And we're sitting here facing out the windshield talking to each other, which is really weird because I want to turn and look at you, but also the microphone is to my right. So I'm kind of trying to split the difference.
Well, we could do that while I'm not driving.
Exactly.
But and actually this is probably boring for all the listeners.
No, this is super interesting.
So I had to make a decision. Do I put the mics to the left of me by the window of the vehicle so that I'm looking straight ahead while I drive, or do I put them between us so that if we're parked, we could look at each other? These are just small little things that podcasters have to think about. But
I'm not sure that there's any podcaster that has ever thought about how to mount a microphone so that you can record while you're driving. Maybe.
This is really just step one, because Terry and I want to get a tandem recumbent bike in Boston and then start recording conversations in that.
So we know where we are, but let's give everyone the brief rundown of who you are and what you're doing in Chicago.
Me?
You.
Okay. I'm here scouting. That didn't help anybody understand, but scouting to me is I'm looking for interesting people, or I'm just looking for people who know interesting people, and that's it. I talk to everybody when I come to town. I reach out to every single person that I know. I reach out to every cool thing I've ever heard of in that city. I reach out not to like half of them. I reach out to every single one of them and just see what happens. And this is the way that I travel now. I've got this like, it's not that willy-nilly. I have a spreadsheet of like thousands of contacts. Literally on my phone. I took it to the iPhone store and they had to transfer, at the time it was to 2,500 contacts. Anyway, so I'm here in Chicago talking to those people that I know in Chicago, and what I want out of it is I want great interviews and I want great stories on what it is to be a creator in Chicago, and that's in any industry. You can be an artist, a musician, a designer, performer, creator, maker, fine artist, video game makers, people who make jewelry, people who make jokes, stand-up comics are always fun to talk to. Yeah, so like literally anybody who is creating something and is thinking about the business end of that. So the title of my podcast is Culture Hustlers. And so that to me means anybody who is hustling culture, someone who is doing something artistic or designed, they're making something, and then they need to somehow sustain that life. I try to share as much for-profit advice as possible and kind of stay away from nonprofit. I stay away from grants and foundations and kind of charitable giving to the arts, and I more focus on the for-profit end of it.
And in fact, this is just one stop on a grand tour. You've been traveling all around the U.S., yes?
Yes.
So
I've
how
been
many
to
states?
40, I'll have to check it again, between 42 and 45. It was 42. I personally have been to 46 states. This project has been to 42, I think, is what it is.
And how long have you been traveling?
With this project, almost 2.5 years.
So you are also consulting with creative businesses and artists who want to
Yes.
make a living from their creative work and their
Yes.
art. And so how does this project sustain itself, or what is the business model behind what you are doing?
Well, I've been coaching for 8 years. So this is not what led to coaching. Like coaching led to this. And the thing is, like, I went and I got my BFA, then I got my MBA. I just wanted artists to be sustained. Like, that's all I wanted to do in my life, was just like help them. But I became very frustrated with the nonprofit approach, and I became very frustrated with the institutional approach. And I saw nonprofits really like leading to unsustainable artists. And so I said, what we really need is better business acumen inside the creative people. So that's why I went to business school. I was about to go get my doctorate. It was interviewing for it, and I was like, this is not the place for me. I would, instead of 5 years of my life and just kind of breaking even financially, and then having a degree and teaching in an institution, what if I built a business over those 5 years? Like, and I could totally break even and it's still the same thing financially. But like, could I build a business? Like, could I scale it in 5 years so that at the end of the 5 years, I'm not working at a school, I am a school. And that really incentivized me.
So it's like real life business school instead of academic business school.
Yeah, like what's the point of having conceptual business knowledge? The two things that are typically agreed upon being very difficult to teach: one, how to be an artist. Pretty hard to teach someone how to do something innovative, right? Pretty hard to teach someone how to create something that's never been created before. That's a problem. The other thing that's really hard to teach is entrepreneurship. So how do you teach having a business? You just have a damn business. Like, there's no other way to really learn. If you're trying to start like a multi-million-dollar, like 8-figure business from the get-go, yeah, you probably want to get an MBA. But if you just want to be a small business, either an independent yourself or like a little collective, just start. That's how entrepreneurship is learned. So I thought, well, there's a gap, because there's creative entrepreneurs who are not getting these experiences, and they're spending a lot of money at college, a lot. So I could meet them way under that price, and I could do it in a way more fun way that isn't institutionalized, but is like, let's learn from road trips. Like, let's make podcasts together. Let's talk to people. Let's tell stories. Let's make works of art with business advice inside it.
And so then how does the podcast, the Culture Hustlers podcast, fit into the bigger scheme of what you're doing? Like, why a podcast specifically?
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's focus in on podcasts. 'Tis your audience. I think that this is basically a really easy way to tell stories. Video editing is far more work than audio. Sorry, podcasters, it is just true, because it's audio plus video. Yep. So audio is a lot easier. The thing about writing is it's not a passive art form, so you have to actively put your eyeballs on it. Whereas listening to podcasts, your audience is actually kind of freed up in a lot of ways. So they can jog, they can drive, they can do all these things while they're listening to you. And it doesn't command your attention the same way a book does. So it's actually like this really awesome medium that's not new, because storytelling is like one of the oldest art forms, if not the oldest art form. But the idea of having an embedded digital file that you can come to, start and stop whenever you want, that really is a new medium, and it's pretty exciting to be doing that.
Is the podcast revenue generating for you right now, or is it just sort of part of the networking and culture creating?
So it's kind of a wash, because I do have revenue from the podcast, but I also have revenue from video. I also have revenue from parking this thing as like a mobile recording studio. So it's all kind of the same thing. But as far as like money for the podcast, so a couple of years ago, I had no income from the mobile incubator, this idea of a mobile recording studio, and Culture Hustlers was not a word that existed yet. And then I got a residency at the Boston Center for the Arts, and basically they paid for the installation to be parked in downtown Boston. And I said, I'm going to record conversations, and then I'm going to start a podcast. So that was kind of like a grant for public art, but I used it to kick off the podcast because it gave me the time and space to do it all. Then I got some money from Harvard to do 6 podcasts. There was someone who had been following me as like a writer and a coach for a long time, and she ended up being very successful. And she was like, you need a podcast, you need a podcast, you need a podcast. Lucas, you need a podcast. And I was like, okay, but like the equipment is like $2,000. And she's like, here's $2,000, just start the damn thing already. And I was like, okay, this is a sign. If someone that I've been coaching is telling me that I need a podcast so bad that she's going to pay for all the equipment just so she can have the podcast, this is a sign. So I went all in on it. So I grabbed all that money together. I think it was like about $20,000 worth of like bundled together stuff that was like saying, start this podcast. I'm not saying you need $20,000 to start a podcast, but that really did help me. I have a mobile studio. It's a little bit more expensive than having like a just like a phone mic in your closet covered with a felt blanket so the sound quality is okay. Like,
Right.
I needed to have a bit more startup funding for that.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you when I stumbled across your website, because I think that there's this kind of limiting view that people have when they think, oh, I want to start a podcast. They have this very specific idea of, I am going to interview people over Skype or over some online media and publish the interviews, and everyone will listen to it, and then I will get sponsors.
But the thing is, there's not a meta story to that. Like, there's a meta story to a dude driving around the country in a mobile podcast studio. That's a meta story that you can follow along with. A chatcast, like over Skype, there's no story there. Like, people invented, they're like, I'm an expert on blah, 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 and I talk to experts on blah, blah, blah. And that's great. Like, there's definitely an audience out there for that. But for my people, like, they weren't interested in that. Like, we needed meta story to, like, tell this, like, greater story of, like, there's a movement happening around the US. Like, we're talking to each other about money as artists.
There's a real, that's a fire department truck. I was like, there's a real ambulance.
Actually, that is an ambulance.
Yes, it is an ambulance.
Okay, the ambulance just drove by the ambulance.
This is the real and raw recording on the street in the Culture Hustlers ambulance. What's one of the most amazing things that's happened to you on the road as you've been doing this project?
Well, I could tell you, meeting Terry back there, Terry in the back seat, who's running the soundboard. I met him in Toledo. What was happening is I was going from Berea, Kentucky at the Artist Thrive Summit up to Detroit, where I was going to do a bunch of interviews. And I stopped in Toledo, Ohio at the request of my friend. She said, you should come to this festival. They're closing down this art and music space. I was like, oh, that's really sad. She's like, yeah, it was open for 8 years, and it was like the underground institution here, and like it's going to be gone now. And like that's a major part of the density of like a creative scene in a city the size of Toledo is like one of those underground DIY spaces. And I was like, all right, well, I'll be there. This sounds like something I need to go to. And I go there and I post up because for 72 hours, they're having a closing party. It's insane for 72 hours straight. And I was there the whole time. And
sleeping in the bed in the back in between?
I was staying at my friend's house. I'm trying to remember if I don't remember is the answer. And then one night I met Terry. I was in the gallery and he came around the corner. We just started talking, found out we had not just an overlap of a love of radio, but we had an overlap of the idea of like finding the untold stories of creators, like not the A-list celebs and the glossy puff pieces, but like real true stories of what it's like to be a creator down in the trenches, just like working your way through life. And we really bonded over that. And so he and I have collaborated ever since. That was about a year ago. Well, anyway, this is to say, one of the best things to do as a creative person is collaborate. Be open to meeting new people and then just like have the conversation and see where it goes.
Yeah.
You might end up doing something different together that amplifies your podcast, or your podcast can amplify their thing, and you can do something totally new together.
What's been your biggest fail or your biggest mistake that you've made along the way?
Oh my God. How much time do we have? I'll tell you kind of like, I'll talk about a bleak point, honestly. There's been ups and downs, like as far as like marketing, finances, like all that stuff goes up and down. Like that's just the way it is. But my spirit, when did my spirit get low? Was right before I met Terry, actually, probably about a year to the day. I was traveling from Miami to Detroit on an absolute hell of a tour, really fast, no money on it. I just had to get from point A to point B. I had like one gig that paid for gas. That like took care of all my expenses for it, but like it took me months to make it all through. I was doing all these recordings. I was making no money. I was really focused on just getting it from point A to point B and recording every single possible story I could. And when I got to my midway point in Berea, Kentucky at the Artist Thrive Summit, that was like my one gig on the road. Everything else was just grind, record. And I got there and I was absolutely burnt out, like spiritually depleted. I was releasing a Kickstarter at the time and it failed. So this is the failure story I'm telling you. But the failure was not really that the Kickstarter failed. The failure was that I was doing too many things at once, is what it was. I wasn't giving enough attention to anything. The Kickstarter would have failed anyway, because I'm not supposed to do Kickstarter. That's not my model, is what I learned. But like around that time, my spirit failed. I was really asking too much of myself as a creative person. It wasn't that I ran out of money. It wasn't that like it wasn't that like somebody broke a window, which also happened. It wasn't that. It was my spirit failed is what it was. And I had to just get back up on that. And I was back up on it by the time I met Terry. But that was a really hard moment where I remember like laying down in the back of the ambulance being like, this isn't going to work. Like, this is a stupid idea. Give up, walk away. And I talked myself out of it. So that was a failure to me, is I let that attitude sink in for too long.
To snap out of it, did you do anything differently, or did you change tactics, or how did you snap yourself out of that?
I stopped trying to do things that didn't work. I think that I was doing too many things, and I should have focused on the ones that were really giving me traction. That taught me a lot about key activities, like what are the best uses of your time, and spend most of your time doing that. And I think as a podcaster, like people are like, oh, I need to run my Instagram page too. And I'm like, if you can't run an Instagram page, just close it. Like, don't worry about it. But what is giving you traction? Because Instagram and like radio don't really click together all the time. Mm-hmm. There might be other platforms you should be focusing on. So like, go find those and focus on them. Stop doing what doesn't work. You're going to burn yourself out. Whereas if you're doing what works, you get so much traction that like it keeps you going. So yeah, I think that's a big trick about being a podcaster. And I see people marketing their shows in kind of uncreative ways. They're like, well, I just have to have a Facebook because I have a podcast. It's like, no, you don't. Mm-hmm. For me, my social media doesn't actually matter. What matters to me is that I have a mailing list of 2,500 people. Like, that is what matters to me, is like, those are my personal relationships. And you don't see that on social media. And I could give a shit if they find me on social media, but like, I send them a personal letter. And that is what has helped me the most. And so I had, during that time, you know what, I started really focusing on the newsletter, to be honest, and I was sending it out every week. And I think I started to focus on the things that actually mattered.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the future of Culture Hustlers? Like, where are you going from here?
Get ready. This is hard to describe over radio. You're just gonna have to see it for yourself, but don't go there yet, because it's not live. It's gonna be live in a couple months. Absolute redo of the website that it's you're not even. Right now you go there and you're like, this is a cool like documentary / podcast project. It's going to be a complete like online university it's going to have 12 different sets of topics, and each topic has a map of different podcasts and documentaries from around the US so that you can learn that particular topic for yourself as a independent creator. And then in addition to that, there is forums, there are road trips that you can take. They're like, and not just with me. No. With dozens of mobile projects and mobile storytellers around the US. Like, this is like the coolest school that you've never heard of.
What do you think is the future of podcasting?
Nobody knows. Nobody fucking knows. I was talking to the founder of the Public Radio Exchange, Jake Shapiro. He's one of my interviews. Podcasters, if you're going to listen to my podcast, listen to the interview with Jake Shapiro. He is the co-founder of the Public Radio Exchange and Radio Public. He was there for the birth of the podcast at MIT. You need to listen to that episode. And Jake has very good advice on podcasters, but we talk about the past of podcasts. So I think in order to talk the future, you really got to think about, like, why did this come about? Mm-hmm. And it was a problem of distribution, really, is that radio was only live, and essentially you had music on tape and CD, and you had audiobooks on tape and CD, but like the time that it took to get what you needed to say to like an audio cassette would take years, because you'd have to write the book first. So there was very, very few pre-recorded things. In fact, one of the early advents of it were churches, because churches would record their sermons and then they would immediately put them out on tape to their congregation. So like that is as close to a podcast as we had. So podcasts were invented so that people could have instant access to conversations, really, not music, instant access to conversations, and a recorded version of that they could start and stop. So what is the future of that medium? Like, you really got to study the medium and then look at like all the different applications that you could have with that. One of the things that I really am a proponent of is get outside your industry in order to innovate. So if you're a podcaster, that's great. You know podcasts, and I want you to know it like the back of your hand. What is it for? What does it do? Why do people like it? On and on. But if you're looking for innovation, don't look at other podcasters. Don't. Please don't do that. It's a waste of time if you try to find innovation with other podcasters. Because if they're doing it, it's already being done. Trust me. By the time you find it and it's already like legitimized, you don't have it and other people do, and you're not an innovator in that sphere. Instead, I want you to look outside your industry. What are performers doing? Like, that's how we got live events for podcasts, is because they're like, let's look outside the podcast industry. How could we do something that was living? And they're like, well, how about a live show? That's not from within the podcast industry. That didn't exist in the podcast industry. It barely existed in the radio show industry. But the idea of a live show is something that came from outside the podcasting realm. So always be looking at other things for inspiration and innovation.
And if people are listening to this thinking, yeah, I got to connect with Culture Hustlers, I got to connect with Lucas, I've got a creative story to tell, I want to learn more, what's your favorite way to connect with people?
Okay, I make it stupid easy for everyone. Obviously, if you go to culturehustlers.com, you're going to find all the social media accounts. I answer all those social media accounts for the most part, and that is a great way to reach out to me. There's you can also reach out to me at lucas@culturehustlers.com if you want to be professional and all that shit. And there's ways for you to get involved. So first of all, listen to the free podcast. Yes, podcasts are still free for now. If you want to do coaching, you can always reach out to me. I'm really picky about who I coach. And then the other thing I would say is, if you like road trips, Andrea, how's this road trip so far?
Well, we haven't gotten very far.
I know. We're still parked. We should fire up. Let's fire up. Let's fire it up. All right. Pulling the choke. Key in the ignition. And let's fire it up.
Nice.
We got nice ambient tone.
Got a little vibration happening here.
Terry, is this good sound design?
It's fun. It's live. It's good.
Okay.
It's live, it's real.
Yeah.
Let's call it Radio Brute.
Yeah.
Right? I think you're inventing a whole new genre of podcast right now.
You know what I realized? I can't,
Yeah, I think
I can
it's-
barely, I've got a big blind spot from, I've got a big blind spot from this microphone.
There you go. Yeah.
This is gonna make it hard as shit to turn. I'm gonna have to figure this out. All right, away we go.
Away we go down Western Avenue, heading north.
Andrea,
What? Yeah.
do you want a mobile podcast studio now?
I kind of do. I'm a little terrified right now, to be honest, about the driving and recording aspect. It's a little.
But the thing is, I talk constantly when I'm driving, so there is a little bit of a blind spot though because of this microphone.
And so, what's been your favorite part of Chicago since you've been here?
Hella good Mexican food. Like, it's not
Speaking
fair.
of which, we're passing Estrella Negra right now on the left. This place is like Mexican street food, and it's very delicious. They have these cinnamon, sort of like churro sweet potato fries.
Oh yeah.
So, of all the cities that you've been to and every place that you've traveled so far, like, where is the creative buzz really happening right now?
It's everywhere. Like, if you think you need to move to a city to access the creative buzz, I think you're looking at the situation through the wrong lens. Like, geographically, there's not a revolution happening. Like, across the world, there's a revolution happening, and it's happening in every city, every basement, like every street corner, every crusty little studio. Like, that, it's a global like revolution that's happening right now as far as creativity. You can live anywhere. I was living in a town of 1,200 people a couple years ago, and I was there, and there was dozens of art businesses there. I was consulting with them, and yeah, I mean, there's the most amazing things happening everywhere. I think just find the city geographically that works for you, like the community that you want, or like, I don't know, the kind of neighborhood you want to live in, the kind of friends and family you want to have around you. But like, don't worry about geographic location. Like, there's amazing things everywhere. But feel free to travel. I recommend that. But you can live anywhere as a creator today. I mean, you got drop shipping, you got all these different advents, you got social media, obviously. There's all these ways to connect with people and actually get shit done from anywhere. And I mean, like, look at us right now. Like, we don't have an address right now. We're literally rolling down the street creating. So yeah, you can do it anywhere.
And for someone who's been happily podcasting along, and now I'm imagining that someone might be feeling kind of bad, like we kind of dissed on their interview-based show, and it's certainly not to diss on that because that's my show too. But for someone,
well, let's shit on them a little bit.
What if they're feeling like, man, this is getting boring, or it's getting stale, or I wish I could do something else, but I just don't know what that is? What would you recommend? What should they do?
I'd recommend getting further away from this semi-truck behind me before I answer that question. All right. Like I was saying earlier, like, don't do stuff that doesn't work. When I think about like the creative dilemma, like the creative, like existential crisis that we hear a lot, it's really like we're addicted to doing shit that nobody wants. Stop making stuff that nobody wants. Stop it. Knock it off. Just don't do it. So it's one part, stop putting shit into the world that no one wants, because you're just getting in the way of people finding what they actually do want. It's one part that. The other part is, wouldn't you be happier? And this is like the creative ego struggle, where people are like, well, if I'm not doing what I want, then I'm not really an artist. Shut up. Half of being an artist is giving the world something that it actually needs. I don't think there's anything like remotely more creative about being this like self-expressive person. I think there's something a little bit more creative about being a self-expressed person who finds an application on how that make the world a better place. And guess what? You will find a way to sustain that. But if you're someone who's only like looking out for themselves, like, why should the world help sustain you? So do something creative, but if you're looking for like something new to do, reach out to your audience, ask them ask them for ideas. Like, they will give you great ideas on like what they wish you were doing. And when you do that, they're happy. And there's like this feedback loop that happens. Like, really stay in touch with your audience. Stop making shit that no one wants.
Great advice. And so what have we not talked about, or what have we not shared that you feel like you'd want the audience to keep in mind or think of, or
embrace the journey?
Say more about that.
Don't worry if you're up or down. Like, just embrace the journey. You got a chat cast and you're talking to people, then you should know by now there's really only 3 kinds of stories. There's stories of people going through shit, there's stories of people coming out of shit, and there's stories of people who don't realize it yet, but they're about to go through shit again. And that's the human experience, that's the journey. And you're gonna experience that as a creator. So there's really only 3 acts in life. They just keep repeating over and over again. When you're a creator, there's ups, there's downs, and then there's the times in between. And just see where you're at and just acknowledge it. Like, if you're down, it's just down for now. If you're up, remember, it's not always gonna be like this, because you have to keep pushing yourself. And just like understand that like there's an ebb and flow to it, and really don't get too attached to the lows or the highs. Just embrace the journey.
Wasn't that a fun ride? Refreshing, maybe a little dangerous, but in a totally safe way. I am so grateful to Lucas for the experience when it happened, for being able to relive that experience in this moment so that I could feel a little less stuck. And I'm grateful to you for being here and listening. Links to all things Lucas Spivey and Culture Hustlers will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimpostor.com/093, linked for you, of course, in the episode description in your app. We will include the link to details about the upcoming cohort to help you build your business model in 12 months through podcasts, documentaries, webinars, one-on-one coaching, and more. That deadline to sign up is April 6th. And remember, you can get the first month free, so don't hesitate. Also, I want to invite you to collaborate with me. We are coming up quickly to episode 100 of The Creative Impostor, and I've already received some recordings from a few listeners for that episode, and I'd love to receive a few more. I've made a list of all of our interview titles going back to the very beginning of the show, which you can find at thecreativimpostor.com/title list. And I want you to pick one that resonates with you, either the episode itself or even just the title, and then record a short voice memo or write me an email about what that phrase or episode means to you, how it has helped you or challenged you in your creative life and work. You can also include links back to your own work or social media, or ask me to share it totally anonymously. All you need to do is record a voice memo and send it to me as an attachment, or type it out in an email to read on the episode. My email is andrea@thecreativeimpostor.com, and use the subject line episode 100. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I want to thank you so much for listening. I hope that you are doing well and taking care of yourself. And this week, I am going to let Lucas take us out of the episode.
I hope you're recording this, Jerry, so everyone knows. So like, laugh track, like laughing is like a great fade out to an interview. If you're like, it's like this perfect fade out. You're like feeling the energy at the end.